Okay, this is part 3 of the real causes behind World War One, and I'm having to restart my video capture software and let my computer cool down because what's happening is it's taxing my video card. It can't handle video recording for long extended periods of time. Something has to do with I don't know, memory dump or something. But anyway, I'm going to continue reading this, and as we go on, it gets more and more interesting because it shows the real reason why they wanted to involve America in World War One and what it has ultimately led to right now in our day. So I'm going to continue to the next part of it, which is the outrageous Treaty of Versailles. The official treaty that ended the war was the Treaty of Versailles, where representatives of all sides sat down at the conference table and wrote the treaty. Several interesting personalities attended these meetings. In the British delegation was the British economist John Maynard Keynes. Representing the American banking interests was Paul Warburg, the chairman of the Federal Reserve. His brother, Max, the head of the German banking firm of M.M. Warburg and Company of Hamburg, Germany, who was not only in charge of Germany's finances but was a leader of the German espionage system, was there as a representative of the German government. The treaty was written to end the war, but another delegate to the conference, Lord Curzon of England, the British Foreign Secretary, saw through what the actual intent was and declared, "This is no peace. This is only a truce for 20 years. Lord Curzon felt that the terms of the treaty were setting the stage for a Second World War, and he correctly predicted the year it would start, 1939. Lord Curzon was indeed a prophet. He picked the actual year that World War II would start. One of the planks of the treaty called for large amounts of war reparations to be paid to the victorious nations by the German government. This plank of the treaty alone caused more grief in the German nation than any other and precipitated 3 events. 1. The hyperinflation of the German mark between 1920 and 1923. 2. The destruction of the middle class in Germany. And 3. The bringing of power of someone who could end the inflation. A dictator like Adolf Hitler. Isn't this interesting? So we've got these bankers pulling the same crap today. They've hyperinflated the dollar. They're actively destroying the middle class and middle class businesses. And they're attempting to bring somebody into our presidency who can fix all the problems. And one of these fixes is Obamacare, which is actually just another way to destroy the middle class and small businesses and further monopolize the medical industry and further fund these greedy psychopaths that want to control everything. And they're forcing people to buy insurance. The parallels are right there. You can't not see it. It's just too obvious. This plank was written by John Foster Dulles, one of the founders of the Council on Foreign Relations, and later the Secretary of State to President Dwight Eisenhower. Even John Maynard Keynes became concerned about the treaty. He wrote, "The peace is outrageous and impossible and can bring nothing but misfortune behind it." In addition to the writing of the Treaty of Versailles, the nations who were victorious in the war also wrote the Charter of the League of Nations, which was ratified on January 10, 1920, and signed by President Wilson for the American government. Wilson brought the treaty back to the United States and asked the Senate to ratify it. The Senate remembering George Washington's advice to avoid foreign entanglements, and reflecting the views of the American people who did not wish to enter the League, refused to ratify the treaty. President Wilson was not pleased, possibly because he saw himself, as Senator Henry Cabot Lodge was quick to point out, as a future president of the world. Isn't that something? And we've got the same parallels today where everybody thinks that the president is the most powerful man in the world. What a crock of shit. Sorry for the language, but that's just the way it is. It is now apparent that Wilson intended to head up the world government and the war was fought to give the world. And he became depressed when the treaty was not ratified. Imagine the disappointment of one who had come so close to becoming the very first president of the world, only to have it taken away by the actions of the Senate of the United States. Imagine the sense of incredible power that Wilson must have felt, thinking he would become the very first individual in the history of mankind to rule the world. Others had tried it and failed, but Wilson was confident that he would succeed. But the American people, expressing their displeasure through the Senate, would not let him. And that's why it's important for us as the people to defy and disobey all of these unconstitutional agendas. Because they can't do anything without our consent. And as it stands right now, they can't make any move without us seeing what they do. It's obvious. So, it sounds cliche, but put down the television, put down the remote, read something, learn some history. Find out how deep of a mess we're in, because this points right to it. 100 years ago, the same crap. The next part, the rich get richer. Others were not so disappointed. However, the war in brief provided an unparalleled opportunity for the richest families to grab exorbitant profits at the expense of the public, and, without exception, they made the most of this opportunity. The rich families, to be sure, wanted the war to be won, but they took care that the victory was expensive to the common taxpayers. They uttered no cries for government economy, so long as the public treasury was at their disposal. So not only were they huge war profiteers, but then they taxed the American people to pay for it as well. They taxed the German government unfairly. It might have been one thing to pay reparations, but unfairly. They put a heavy burden on them, but they also put a burden on the American people by introducing taxes to the American people that would further destroy the U.S. economy. And we saw that during the Great Depression. One of the families who repeated the exorbitant profits were the Rockefellers, who were very eager for the United Nations to enter World War I, and who made far more than $200 million from the conflict. So we've got hundreds of millions flying around based off of this conflict. 100 million was funding the war for at least the French part of it, and 200 million was made by the Rockefellers. But support for the League of Nations continued. The Grand Orient Lodge of Freemasonry of France was one which advised all of its members. It is the duty of the Universal Freemasonry to give its full support to the League of Nations. As could have been anticipated, the League of Nations became a major issue during the presidential election of 1920. The Republican candidate, Warren G. Harding, was on record as opposing the League and further attempts to ratify the Charter. It will avail nothing to discuss in detail the League of Covenant, which was conceived for world supergovernment in the existing League of Nations. World government governing with its superpowers, this republic will have no part. He was opposed in the Republican primaries by General Leonard Wood. who Fort Leonard Wood is named after. One of the Republican warhawks who was backed by a powerful group of rich men who wished a military man in the White House. The American people once again manifested their disapproval of the League, voted for Harding as an evidence of that distrust and concern. Harding outpolled his opposition by a greater margin than did President Wilson, who had kept us out of the war during the elections of 1916. Wilson got only 52% of the vote, and Harding got 64%. Harding was a supporter of William Howard Taft, the president who opposed the bankers and their Federal Reserve bill. After his election, he named Harry M. Daugherty, Taft's campaign manager, as Attorney General. His other cabinet appointments were not as wise, however, as he unexplainably surrounded himself with men representing the oil industry. For instance, his Secretary of State was Charles Evan Hughes, an attorney of Standard Oil. His Secretary of Treasury was Andrew Mellon, owner of Gulf Oil. His Postmaster General was Will Hayes, an attorney for Sinclair Oil. And his Secretary of the Interior was Albert Fall, a protege of the oil men. It was Mr. Fall who was to be President Harding's downfall, as he later accepted a bribe from Harry Sinclair in exchange for a lease of the Navy's oil reserves in Teapot Dome, Wyoming. There are many who believe that the scandal was intended to discredit the Harding administration in an attempt to remove him from office for two very important reasons. One, Harding was consistently vocal against the League of Nations, and there was still a chance that its supporters could get the United States to join, as the League had survived the Senate's prior refusal to ratify the treaty. And two, Attorney General Daugherty had been prosecuting the oil trust under the Sherman antitrust laws. These two activities did not please the oil interests who had created the Teapot Dome scandal, but Harding, unfortunately, did not live to see the full repercussions of the artificial scandal, as he died on August 2nd, 1923. Before the story completely surfaced, there are those who believe that there were some who couldn't wait for the Teapot Dome scandal to remove the President Harding, and that he was poisoned. But the oil interests allowed it to completely play its course as a warning to future presidents of the United States not to oppose the oil interests. This is interesting because the same thing happened to Kennedy when he attempted to dissolve the Federal Reserve. He printed silver certificates, U.S. Treasury bills, that replaced the Federal Reserve notes. I used to have one. It was a $10 silver certificate printed in 1963. They did a short run of them, and after that they stopped printing U.S. Treasury notes and went back to printing Federal Reserve notes. And ever since then, they have not printed anything but those. And when they caught you with a U.S. Treasury note, they would confiscate it. If you pay with a U.S. Treasury note, you're never going to see it again. So I just happened to chance on one, and this was a few years ago. I don't know what happened to it since then. I think somebody stole it from me. But when you chance on these, they're very rare now. It just goes to show you, over 100 years ago, this same thing was happening as what we're seeing right now. Major corporations are in charge of our government, and they are attempting to bully the American people into submission. They're not playing nice anymore. They're not simply using trickery and sleight of hand and misdirection. They are now attempting to bully us. And they are attempting to use us against ourselves. So police and military, pay attention to this. Remember your oath. Join the correct side when it comes to history. Be on the right side of history. That's all for now, and maybe later we'll get into the true cause of World War II. And that'll explain some more. All right. Bye for now.